My name is Vicky Martinez, and I'm 52 years old. After 28 years of marriage, I thought I knew my husband Richard better than anyone. We built our real estate empire together from nothing, turning our love story into a business success that included 3 rental properties, our main home, and a beautiful cabin at Lake Tahoe. As the financial manager of our family business, I handled every contract, every legal document, every password. I trusted Richard completely, especially as our 28th wedding anniversary approached. I had already planned something special, bought the perfect gift, and made reservations at the restaurant where we first met. But Richard seemed distant lately, working late with his new secretary Jessica more and more often. I told myself it was just work stress, but deep down something felt wrong. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that betrayal always comes with a price. Because what happened next taught my husband that underestimating a determined wife was the biggest mistake he ever made. For the past 3 months, I'd been telling myself that Richard's behavior changes were perfectly normal. After all, we'd built our real estate portfolio from absolutely nothing. When we started 29 years ago, we had $200 in our checking account and a dream of financial independence. Now, we owned 3 profitable rental apartments in downtown areas, our 4-bedroom home in the suburbs, and that gorgeous log cabin at Lake Tahoe that served as our weekend retreat. My role in our success couldn't be understated. While Richard focused on sales and client relationships, I managed every single financial aspect of our business. I knew every mortgage payment, every rental agreement, every insurance policy by heart. Most importantly, my name was on the majority of our properties because I had been the one with the better credit when we started buying real estate. Richard handled the charm and handshakes, but I handled the real work behind the scenes. 8 months ago, Richard hired Jessica Walsh as his new secretary. At 29, she was fresh out of her MBA program, incredibly ambitious and undeniably intelligent. I had no problem with her initially. In fact, I appreciated having someone competent helping Richard with his increasingly busy schedule. Jessica was professional, always stayed late to finish projects, and seemed genuinely dedicated to helping our business grow. But around 3 months ago, I started noticing subtle changes in my husband's routine. Richard began coming home later, and later usually around 8 or 9 in the evening, instead of his usual 6 o'clock. His explanation was always the same. He needed to finish important projects, with Jessica review contracts, or prepare presentations for potential clients. At first, this made perfect sense. Our business was expanding, and extra work hours seemed like a natural consequence of success. Then I noticed his appearance changing. Richard had always been casual about his clothing, preferring comfortable polo shirts and khakis for work. Suddenly, he started wearing pressed dress shirts, expensive ties, and cologne. The cologne purchase particularly surprised me because in 28 years of marriage, Richard had never shown interest in fragrances. When I complimented his new scent, he brushed off my comment with a vague response about wanting to look more professional for important clients. His phone behavior became increasingly suspicious as well. Richard used to leave his phone face up on our kitchen counter, never bothering to hide incoming messages or calls. Now his phone was always face down, and he had changed all his passwords without mentioning it to me. When I asked about the password changes, he claimed it was for security reasons recommended by Jessica, who apparently had concerns about business information being compromised. Our conversations at dinner became shorter and less meaningful. Richard seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently and responding to my questions with one-word answers. When I tried to discuss our upcoming anniversary plans, he showed no enthusiasm whatsoever. Our physical intimacy decreased significantly as well. Richard claimed he was exhausted from work, but I suspected something deeper was happening. Despite all these red flags, I convinced myself that Richard was simply going through a stressful period. After 28 years together, I trusted our marriage completely. We had survived financial struggles, raised 2 wonderful children who were now successful adults, and built a life that most couples could only dream about. Surely, A few months of work stress couldn't threaten something we had spent nearly 3 decades building together. 2 weeks before our anniversary on June 15th, I decided to plan something truly special for Richard and me. Our relationship had been distant lately, but I believed that a romantic celebration might help us reconnect and rediscover the spark that had sustained us for so many years. I made a reservation at Bella Vista, the intimate Italian restaurant where Richard had taken me on our very first date 29 years ago. The restaurant held incredible sentimental value for both of us. It was where Richard first told me he loved me, where he proposed to me a year later at the corner table by the window, and where we had celebrated every major milestone in our relationship. I specifically requested that same corner table, hoping to recreate the magic of our early romance. For his gift, I decided to purchase the Omega watch he had admired 2 years ago during a shopping trip. Richard had stopped in front of the jewelry store display, commenting on how classic and elegant the timepiece looked. At the time, we couldn't justify such an expensive purchase, but now with our business thriving, I felt it was the perfect way to show my appreciation for his hard work and dedication to our family. I spent hours creating a photo album that chronicled our entire relationship, from our college dating photos to recent pictures from our children's graduations. Each page included handwritten notes about my favorite memories from that time period. I also wrote him a heartfelt letter similar to the romantic notes we used to exchange when we were young and deeply infatuated with each other. My preparation extended beyond gifts and reservations. I took time off work early that week, scheduled a spa appointment and hairstyling session, and purchased a beautiful red dress that I knew Richard would love. Red had always been his favorite color on me, and I wanted to look absolutely stunning for our special evening together. I also planned a surprise for when we returned home after dinner. I bought candles, his favorite wine, and created a playlist of all the songs that were meaningful to our relationship over the years. Every detail was carefully planned to remind Richard why we had fallen in love in the first place. However, Richard's reaction to my anniversary enthusiasm was disappointing and concerning. When I mentioned our upcoming celebration, he responded with complete indifference. "Oh, June 15th. Let me check my schedule," he said, as if our wedding anniversary was just another business appointment that might conflict with his other obligations. His lack of excitement hurt deeply, but I told myself he was probably planning his own surprise and didn't want to reveal his plans prematurely. When I suggested that we should plan something special together, Richard seemed annoyed rather than pleased. "Don't do anything too elaborate," he said dismissively. "I'm really busy with work right now, and I don't need any additional stress." His words felt like a rejection of our entire relationship, but I pushed down my hurt feelings and continued with my preparations. The most troubling incident occurred 3 days before our anniversary. I overheard Richard having a quiet phone conversation in his home office. His voice was soft and gentle, completely different from his usual business tone or the way he had been speaking to me lately. I only caught fragments of the conversation, but I clearly heard him say, "June 15th. Let me see what I can arrange." The tenderness in his voice reminded me of how he used to speak to me when we were newlyweds. Instead of confronting him about the suspicious phone call, I convinced myself that Richard was planning a surprise romantic evening for me. Perhaps he was being secretive because he wanted our anniversary to be as special as I did. Maybe his distant behavior was just an act to throw me off the scent of his surprise plans. I desperately wanted to believe that our marriage was still strong, that the man I loved was still the same person I had married 28 years ago. June 15th arrived with beautiful sunshine and clear skies, which I took as a positive sign for our special day. I woke up feeling excited and optimistic about our anniversary celebration. Richard had already left for work by the time I got up, but he had left a brief note on the kitchen counter that read, "Have some urgent business to handle this morning. We'll be home early tonight." The note was brief and impersonal, but I chose to interpret it positively. Maybe he was rushing to finish work so he could focus completely on our romantic evening together. I spent the entire day pampering myself and preparing for what I hoped would be a magical night. I had my hair and makeup done professionally and I felt absolutely beautiful in my new red dress. By 5:30 in the evening, I was completely ready for our dinner reservation at 7 o'clock. I sat in our living room, wearing my stunning outfit, holding the carefully wrapped Omega watch, and feeling genuinely excited about reconnecting with my husband. 6 o'clock came and went with no sign of Richard. I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text message saying, "I'm ready and waiting for you. Can't wait for our special evening together," but received no response. By 6:30, my excitement was beginning to transform into worry and confusion. At 7 o'clock, the exact time of our dinner reservation, I called Richard's office directly. The phone rang and rang with no answer, which was unusual because Richard always answered his business line during working hours. I began to panic, wondering if something terrible had happened to him. Had there been an accident? Was he hurt and unable to contact me? Desperate for answers, I drove to Richard's office building downtown. The parking garage was nearly empty and most of the office lights were turned off. When I reached Richard's floor, I found his office completely dark and locked. The building security guard, who recognized me from previous visits, provided information that made my heart stop beating. "Oh, Mrs. Martinez," the guard said cheerfully. "Mr. Martinez and his secretary left around 4 o'clock this afternoon. They seemed to be in a great mood, all dressed up for something special. She was wearing a beautiful red dress, just like yours, actually." The words hit me like physical blows. Richard and Jessica had left work early, dressed up, and gone somewhere together on our wedding anniversary. My hands started shaking as the horrible reality began to sink in. I thanked the security guard and stumbled back to my car, feeling nauseous and dizzy. I remembered that Richard and I shared location tracking through a family safety app on our phones. With trembling fingers, I opened the app and searched for Richard's current location. The result made me want to scream. Richard was at Bella Vista Restaurant, the exact location where I had made our anniversary dinner reservation, the place where we had shared so many precious memories throughout our relationship. The drive to Bella Vista felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life. My mind raced with possibilities and explanations, but deep down I knew exactly what I would find. When I arrived at the restaurant, I parked across the street and looked through the large front windows. The sight that greeted me destroyed every hope I had been clinging to for the past few months. Richard and Jessica were seated at the corner table, our special table, the very place where Richard had proposed to me 29 years earlier. Jessica was wearing a red dress remarkably similar to mine, and she looked radiant and happy. Richard was leaning across the table, speaking to her with the same tender expression he used to reserve for me. As I watched in horror, Richard pulled out a small jewelry box and presented it to Jessica. She opened it to reveal what appeared to be an expensive Cartier watch, significantly more costly than the Omega I had bought for him. The cruelest detail was that Richard gently took Jessica's hand and kissed it, the exact same gesture he had made when proposing to me at that very table nearly 3 decades ago. They were celebrating at our restaurant at our table on our anniversary, while I sat alone in my car wearing the dress I had chosen to win back my husband's love. I could have marched into that restaurant and confronted them both immediately. I could have screamed, thrown things, and made a scene that would have humiliated them in front of everyone. But something inside me had changed in that moment of absolute betrayal. Instead of acting on my emotions, I felt a cold, calculating calm settle over me. Richard wanted to play games with our marriage, fine, but he was about to learn that he had chosen the wrong opponent. I drove home in complete silence, my tears dried up and replaced by a steely determination. Richard thought he could betray me and suffer no consequences. He was about to discover that the woman who had managed our entire financial empire for 28 years was perfectly capable of protecting what belonged to her. I arrived home at 9 o'clock and immediately began planning my response to Richard's betrayal. I poured myself a glass of the wine I had bought for our romantic evening and sat down at my computer to organize my thoughts. The photo album and love letter I had prepared sat on the table, mocking reminders of my naive trust in our marriage. As I sipped the wine, I reflected on everything I had contributed to our relationship and our business over the past 28 years. I had sacrificed my own career ambitions to support Richard's dreams. I had managed our finances, handled all the legal paperwork for our properties, and maintained the detailed records that allowed our business to thrive. Most importantly, my name was the primary name on most of our property deeds because I had been the one with a better credit history when we started investing in real estate. Richard had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible, but he had also underestimated my intelligence and my access to everything we had built together. I knew every password to our business accounts, every detail of our mortgage agreements, and every legal document related to our properties. I had the power to make Richard's life extremely complicated if I chose to use it. At 11:30, I heard Richard's car pulling into our driveway. I quickly put away the wine and pretended to be getting ready for bed. When he walked through the front door, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He greeted me with a casual, "Happy anniversary, baby," and gave me a brief, meaningless kiss on the cheek. "How was your day?" I asked innocently, testing whether he would continue lying to me. "Pretty busy," Richard replied without any hesitation. "Had a long meeting with some potential investors that ran really late. Sorry I missed dinner. Did you eat something?" His ability to lie so smoothly and convincingly made me realize that this betrayal had been going on much longer than I had suspected. This wasn't a single moment of weakness or a recent mistake. Richard had been living a double life for months, possibly even longer, and he was clearly comfortable deceiving me on a daily basis. "How about you?" he continued. "Did you have a good anniversary?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed out loud. "It was quiet," I said carefully. "I spent some time thinking about our marriage and everything we've built together over the years." "That's nice," Richard responded absent-mindedly, already focused on his phone. "I'm pretty tired. I think I'll head to bed soon." As I watched my husband scroll through his phone, probably texting Jessica about their romantic evening, I made a firm decision. I wasn't going to confront Richard immediately or beg him to end his affair. Instead, I was going to show him exactly what he stood to lose by betraying the woman who had made his success possible. I stayed awake all night planning every detail of my response. Richard loved our Lake Tahoe cabin more than any of our other properties. It was where he went to relax, fish, and escape from business stress. He also adored his new BMW, which he treated like his most prized possession. These were the things that mattered most to him, and they were about to become completely inaccessible. By morning, I had developed a comprehensive plan that would teach Richard the true cost of betrayal. He wanted to play games with our marriage. I was about to show him that I was much better at strategic thinking than he had ever imagined. The next morning, June 16th, Richard left for work at his usual time, acting as though nothing had changed between us. He kissed me goodbye with the same casual indifference he had shown for months, completely unaware that his life was about to be turned upside down. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I called in sick to my own job and began implementing my plan. My first step was gathering concrete evidence of Richard's infidelity. I drove to Bella Vista and spoke with the restaurant manager who had known Richard and me for years. I explained that I needed to verify some credit card charges for tax purposes, and he was happy to help. The restaurant security camera had captured clear footage of Richard and Jessica's romantic dinner, including the moment he gave her the expensive watch. I also obtained copies of the credit card receipts, which showed that Richard had paid for their dinner and then visited an upscale jewelry store immediately afterward. Next, I contacted my trusted locksmith, Jake, who had handled all our security needs for the past decade. I explained that Richard had lost his keys and asked Jake to change the locks on our main house immediately. Jake was efficient and professional, installing new deadbolts on all 3 entrances within 2 hours. I made sure to keep one set of keys and hide the spare set in a location only I knew about. I then called the property management company for our 3 rental apartments and requested immediate lock changes for all units, citing security concerns. Since my name was on all the lease agreements and I had always been their primary contact, they agreed to complete the work by the end of the day. My most important task was securing our Lake Tahoe cabin. This property was entirely in my name, purchased with inheritance money from my parents 5 years earlier. Richard considered the cabin his personal retreat, but legally, he had no claim to it whatsoever. I drove the 2 hours to Lake Tahoe and had those locks changed as well. I also updated the security system with the new codes that only I would know. While I was at the cabin, I took time to transfer a significant amount of money from our joint checking account into my personal savings account. As the primary account holder, I had every right to move our money, especially since Richard had been spending it on gifts for his mistress. I also placed temporary holds on our joint credit cards, explaining to the bank that I suspected fraudulent activity. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Williams, a family law attorney I had known for years through our business dealings. Patricia was shocked to learn about Richard's affair, but she was immediately ready to help me protect my interests. She reviewed all our property documents and confirmed what I already knew. I had significant legal advantages because my name was primary on most of our assets. At 5:30, right around Richard's usual arrival time, I heard his car pull into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as he approached the front door with his usual confident stride. When he tried to insert his key into the lock, nothing happened. He tried several times jiggling the key and pushing harder, but the door remained firmly locked. Richard stepped back looking confused and then rang the doorbell. When I didn't answer immediately, he began knocking loudly. Finally, he called my phone. "Vicky, what's going on? My key isn't working. Are you inside?" His voice carried a mixture of confusion and growing concern. I walked to the intercom system by the front door, but didn't unlock it. "Oh, you're home?" I said sweetly. "I thought you might be busy with another anniversary celebration tonight." There was a long, telling silence on the other end. "Anniversary? What are you talking about? Yesterday I was working. Working at Bella Vista with Jessica. That's interesting. I didn't realize ordering expensive jewelry for your secretary was part of your job description." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard knew he had been caught, and he knew that I had evidence of his betrayal. For the first time in months, he was speechless. "Vicky, please open the door. We need to talk about this." "Actually, we don't," I replied calmly. "You made your choices, Richard. Now you get to live with the consequences. I suggest you find a hotel room for tonight." I turned off the intercom and walked away from the door, leaving my husband of 28 years standing outside the home we had built together, finally understanding that his actions had serious repercussions. The next morning, June 17th, my phone started ringing at 6 o'clock in the morning. Richard had been calling continuously, leaving voicemails that ranged from confused to apologetic to angry. His text messages filled my phone screen. "Vicky, please let's talk about this," followed by, "It was just dinner, nothing happened." And then, "Jessica is just a colleague, you're misunderstanding everything." I ignored all of his communications and drove up to our Lake Tahoe cabin to complete the final phase of my plan. The cabin represented Richard's favorite escape from the world, his personal sanctuary where he went fishing and claimed to do his best thinking. Since the property was entirely in my name, I had every legal right to deny him access. The locksmith had done excellent work. I tested the new keys and updated the security system with completely new access codes. Richard's favorite retreat was now as inaccessible to him as our marriage had become. I spent some time at the cabin walking around the property and remembering all the good times we had shared there before his betrayal destroyed everything. When I returned home that afternoon, I continued implementing my comprehensive plan. I contacted the property managers for our 3 rental apartments and confirmed that all the locks had been changed successfully. I also changed all the passwords for our home Wi-Fi network streaming services and cloud storage accounts. Richard's home office, which he used for business meetings and personal work, was now locked, and I was the only person with access. At 6 o'clock, Richard arrived again with an enormous bouquet of red roses. These were expensive long-stem flowers, exactly like the ones he had probably bought for Jessica just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was now using the same romantic gestures on me that he had been using on his mistress. "Vicky, please, we really need to talk about this situation." Richard called through the door. "I know you're upset, but locking me out of our house isn't going to solve anything." I activated the intercom again. "Our house." That's interesting terminology, considering you've been spending your time in other people's houses lately. Look, I admit I had dinner with Jessica, but it wasn't what you think. It was just a business meeting that ran late. We were discussing some important client presentations. Business meeting, I laughed. Is that what you call giving expensive Cartier watches to your employees these days? Is that standard business practice in your industry? Richard's shock was audible. How did you... Vicky, are you following me? Are you spying on me? I had been expecting this question. Following you, Richard. I don't need to follow you. I have access to our credit card statements, our bank records, and our GPS tracking system. Did you forget that we share location services for family safety? Every place you go, every purchase you make, every lie you tell leaves a digital trail that I can access anytime I want. This is crazy, Vicky. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime. Terrible crime? I repeated. You spent our 28th wedding anniversary having a romantic dinner with another woman at the restaurant where you proposed to me. You gave her expensive jewelry while I sat at home waiting for you wearing the dress I bought to celebrate our marriage. If that's not a terrible crime, I don't know what is. I then played the recording I had made of the restaurant security footage on my phone, holding it close to the intercom, so Richard could hear his own voice telling Jessica how beautiful she looked. Would you like to hear more evidence, or are you ready to admit what you've been doing? Richard's tone changed completely. He sounded defeated, desperate, and genuinely frightened for the first time since I had known him. Vicky, please, I know I messed up. I know this looks bad, but it's not what you think. Jessica and we haven't. It's complicated, but it's not serious. Not serious? I asked. Then why did you spend our anniversary with her instead of your wife? Richard didn't have an answer for that question, and his silence confirmed everything I needed to know about his priorities and his true feelings for me. By the third day of Richard's exile from our home, he had become increasingly desperate. He started calling our adult children, hoping they would intervene on his behalf and convince me to forgive him. However, our son David and daughter Sarah both supported my decision completely. Dad, you seriously messed up, David told him bluntly. Mom has been nothing but devoted to you for my entire life. If you chose to throw that away for some secretary, that's your problem to fix. Don't expect us to clean up your mess. Sarah was even more direct. I can't believe you did this to Mom on your anniversary. That's just cruel and heartless. You need to figure out how to make this right, but it's not our responsibility to help you. That same afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call from Jessica herself. Her voice was shaky and nervous as she tried to explain her version of events. Mrs. Martinez, I think there might be some misunderstanding about what happened between Richard and me, Jessica began carefully. I really respect you and your marriage, and I would never want to cause problems in your relationship. Misunderstanding, I replied calmly. What exactly am I misunderstanding about you having anniversary dinner with my husband at the restaurant where he proposed to me? Jessica was silent for several seconds before continuing. Richard told me that you two were separated. He said you were living apart and planning to get divorced soon. He made it seem like your marriage was already over. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Richard hadn't just been having an affair. He had been actively planning to leave our marriage and had been lying to Jessica about our relationship status. He told you we were separated, I asked. Yes, Jessica admitted. He said you were just staying in the same house temporarily for financial reasons, but that the marriage was finished. I never would have gone to dinner with him if I knew you were still together. I appreciated Jessica's honesty, and I realized that she had been manipulated by Richard just as much as I had been. Jessica, I can assure you that Richard and I were not separated. We were living as husband and wife right up until 3 days ago. He never mentioned divorce to me, and we were supposed to celebrate our anniversary together. Jessica started crying. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Martinez. I had no idea he was lying to me. I thought I was dating a man who was getting divorced, not destroying a marriage. After hanging up with Jessica, I felt a mixture of vindication and renewed anger. Richard's betrayal was even worse than I had originally thought. He hadn't just been having an affair, he had been planning to abandon our marriage entirely while lying to everyone involved. That evening, Richard appeared at our front door in a completely different state than before. Instead of standing confidently and making demands, he was kneeling on our front porch, looking genuinely remorseful and desperate. "Vicky, I know I've been a complete fool," he said through the intercom. "I know I've hurt you in ways that are probably unforgivable. This whole thing with Jessica, it started as innocent friendship, but it became something I never intended. I was having some kind of middle-age crisis, and I made terrible decisions that I regret with every fiber of my being." For the first time since discovering his affair, Richard was being completely honest with me. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. 4 months, he admitted. "It started as working dinners, then became personal conversations, and eventually became something romantic. But Vicky, I never stopped loving you. I never wanted to destroy our marriage. I was just confused and stupid and selfish." "You told her we were separated and getting divorced." I know how terrible that sounds. I was living in some kind of fantasy where I could have both relationships without anyone getting hurt. I realize now how insane and cruel that was. I listened to Richard's confession, but I felt no immediate urge to forgive him or let him back into our house. 28 years of marriage had been shattered by 4 months of lies and betrayal. The man I had trusted completely had proven himself capable of deception on a level I never would have imagined. "Richard, I need you to understand something very clearly," I said through the intercom. "This marriage is over. I want you to move out permanently and find your own place to live. I'll be consulting with my attorney about how we divide our assets, but I will not be reconciling with you." "Vicky, please don't make any permanent decisions right now. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to prove that I can be the husband you deserve." "The husband I deserved wouldn't have spent our anniversary with another woman," I replied firmly. "The husband I deserved wouldn't have lied to me for 4 months. The husband I deserved wouldn't have told his mistress that our marriage was over without bothering to inform his actual wife." I turned off the intercom and walked away from the door, leaving Richard to contemplate the full extent of what his choices had cost him. The following weeks marked the beginning of my journey toward healing and rediscovering my own identity outside of my marriage. The first week was incredibly painful. I cried frequently, felt angry most of the time, and questioned everything about my life and my choices. But by the second and third weeks, something unexpected happened. I started feeling powerful and liberated. For the first time in 28 years, I was making decisions based entirely on my own wants and needs. I joined a yoga class that met 3 times a week. I started attending a book club at our local library where I met women who were intelligent, independent, and inspiring. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my marriage, rediscovering parts of my personality that had been dormant for years. 2 months after Richard's exile began, I made the decision to take my first solo vacation ever. I booked a 2-week trip to Italy, something I had always wanted to do, but had never pursued because Richard preferred domestic travel. Those 2 weeks in Rome, Florence, and Venice were transformative. I realized that I had spent so much of my adult life defining myself in relation to Richard that I had forgotten who I was as an individual person. Richard continued trying to win me back throughout this period. He sent flowers, wrote letters, and even attended marriage counseling sessions alone, hoping to demonstrate his commitment to change. But I had moved beyond the point where his efforts could make a difference. I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship with someone who had proven himself capable of such devastating betrayal. 6 months after changing the locks, I finally agreed to meet with Richard for a serious conversation about our future. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop where we could talk without the emotional weight of being in our former home. Richard looked older and more tired than I had ever seen him. "Vicky, I know I destroyed the best thing in my life," he said immediately. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness or another chance, but I need you to know that losing you has taught me things about myself that I never understood before." "What kinds of things?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "I took you for granted for years without even realizing it. You managed our entire financial life, supported my career dreams, raised our children to be wonderful people, and I never fully appreciated any of it. I was so focused on feeling important and desired that I forgot how lucky I was to have a partner who truly loved me." I listened to Richard's words, and I could see that his remorse was genuine. But I had learned something important about myself during our separation. I was stronger, happier, and more fulfilled living independently than I had been in years. "Richard, I appreciate your honesty, and I'm glad you've learned from this experience. But I've learned something too. I've learned that I don't need you to be complete. For too many years, I defined my worth based on our relationship, and I lost sight of my own dreams and goals." "Does that mean there's no chance for us?" Richard asked hopefully. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe someday I'll be ready to consider forgiveness and rebuilding trust. But that day isn't today, and it might not be anytime soon. You broke something fundamental between us, and I'm not sure it can ever be completely repaired." We left the coffee shop with no concrete resolution, but with a better understanding of how profoundly Richard's choices had changed both of our lives. Today, as I sit in the home that I now occupy alone, I reflect on everything that has happened over the past year. I still have all the keys to every property we built together, but more importantly, I have the keys to my own independence and self-respect. Richard taught me that the most important home isn't the place where someone else holds the keys, but the place where I choose to open the door. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the catalysts for discovering strength we never knew we possessed. I've learned that some people enter our lives to teach us about love, and others enter to teach us about our own resilience. Richard taught me both lessons, though probably not in the way he intended. And while I may never fully forgive him for what he did to our marriage, I've discovered that forgiveness isn't always necessary for healing. Sometimes the best revenge is simply showing someone what they lost and proving that you're capable of thriving without them. As I've rebuilt my life on my own terms, I've realized that the woman who changed those locks wasn't just protecting her property. She was protecting her future, her dignity, and her right to be valued and respected. And that protection was worth more than any relationship built on lies and betrayal could ever be. So to anyone watching who has ever felt betrayed or taken for granted, remember this: you have more power than you realize. You deserve more respect than you're receiving. And sometimes the best thing you can do is change the locks and give yourself permission to start over. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between forgiveness and self-protection? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult times, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that every ending can be a new beginning if you're brave enough to turn the key.